Let's talk about how to pre-write your novel. So what is pre-writing? Pre-writing is collecting and developing ideas for your story. If you think of it like kind of a cooking metaphor, right? When you're actually working on writing the book, that's the chef in the kitchen going to town making the dish. Pre-writing is where you're trying to figure out what sort of ingredients you're going to be using. A lot of people think of pre-writing and they think of it as simply trying to outline your book, when that's not the case at all. You're not necessarily creating an outline with your pre-writing. You're simply just trying to come up with ideas for things that you think are useful. The key to good pre-writing is to systematically go through and review each of the major elements of your story to try and figure out what kinds of ideas you want to play with for those different individual elements. Too often people try to skip this step, or they try to take one element and develop it and run with it, and they don't look at anything else, and that can cause problems further down the road. So what exactly are the elements that you need to think about? This does depend slightly based upon your genre and what kind of book that you're going to be working on. But here's some good general guidelines. Characters. Characters are one of the most important elements to any story, and so when I am pre-writing for my characters, I try to come up with a few different pieces for them. Number one, I think about what sort of broad archetype they are. For example, maybe I want to write about a thief, or a musketeer, or a bureaucrat. Those are definitely some sorts of story pieces that I enjoy. Another piece that I come up with my characters is I come up with what's their big goal. What does this character want? Because that's going to be instrumental throughout the rest of the story. I also think about a few interesting aspects of their personality, but again, I'm painting in very broad strokes. I'm not doing super detailed character dossiers. I don't have their full personality fleshed out. Some of that's going to come out in the writing. I'm just trying to come up with some bones of some major characters, of my major protagonists, just to get an idea about a little bit about who they are and how they're going to fit into the story. Conflict. I brainstorm what the major conflicts will be throughout the story. This is both sort of the major conflicts that my protagonists are going to encounter, but I also come up with other sort of side conflicts that might make interesting side plots. And there's usually some brainstorming to try and find some interesting and unique versions of this. Plot. Now, when I talk about brainstorming my plot, I'm not talking about doing a full outline or anything like that. This is where I'm simply trying to brainstorm what are some interesting elements of my story? What are some interesting elements of three-act structure that I think I would want? So, for example, do I know what my climax is going to be? Do I have an idea of what my inciting incident will be? When I'm doing some pre-writing for this kind of plot, I'm filing away those neat ideas that I might want to grab later. It's not the same as an entire outline. Now, if you're curious about the elements of three-act structure, I do have a video on three-act structure that I'll provide an information card to that you can link to and take a look at that if you want to see some more about it. Setting. Setting is something that is very important, and depending upon your genre, it might be overwhelmingly important. For example, if you're writing a contemporary thriller set in Dayton, Ohio, you better know what Dayton, Ohio looks like. If you're writing some massive epic fantasy, then you might want to be doing some really intense world building as part of your setting. For me, I tend to write a lot looser science fiction and fantasy, so I do my setting with very broad strokes, saying, I want to set in a vaguely steampunk city, or I want to do a space opera with just a few different neat planets. This is something that you can go really, really deep with. I'm not going to go into details on how to world build, but again, the point of this brainstorming section, the point of pre-writing, is just simply kind of figuring out what sort of elements of the setting you want to play with. And whether that is spending time to do an elaborate and detailed world-building exercise, or simply going, I think I want to write a city with that's suspended over chains above a giant pit. Cool. It's as much information as you feel comfortable and as much information as you need to actually start writing. Those are some of the important elements that go into every novel. Now, if you look at any individual craft book, they have their own individual lists of what elements they think are important for every novel. I'll tell you that honestly, it does depend. It also depends upon a lot on what genre you're going to be writing in, and that's where your individual experience with your genre is going to get you the most mileage. Now, as for how to actually develop each one of these, that's where you can simply do brainstorming or mind mapping or try to make some lists of just different topics or ideas that you find interesting. Maybe you do a little bit of research into some of these fields that you find interesting. Maybe you just found an article on lockpicking and you're like, this is a cool thing I want to throw into my story. Great, go for it. The key is to take the time to systematically develop every one of these. I wrote a video called The Fundamental Axiom of Pre-Writing. I've got a link to that as well. And that video actually details how most commonly people get an idea for one element of their story and they want to run with it. But that's the idea that they start with. That's one element. That's not enough to sustain an entire book. So instead, taking that time to go through and double up and expand upon all these other elements that are going to make up your story is an integral part of all the planning that you do when you're writing a novel. That's it. That's all I have for today. It's not any kind of magic. It's just simply a little bit of process. If there's any particular elements or any particular ways that you pre-write that you think are really useful, let me know down below in the comments. I'd love to hear what other people are using, and I'd love that to be a resource for other people coming to this video. If you have any other questions, feel free to fire off down in the comments, or you can find me on Twitter. I'm there entirely too much. I'm at BowtieWriter. Feel free to reach out and ask a question. I'll try to help you out. If you want to know more about pre-writing, I've got a link coming up in the credits to a video I have about the fundamental axiom of pre-writing, and I've also got another technique that I use to guide my pre-writing that I call the expand method. I've got a link to that as well, so feel free to check those out. Otherwise, that's it. That's all I have for everyone today. Take care. Be kind to yourselves.